Welcome to the 3030 Health Podcast. The following discussion is for education and entertainment. It is not intended to diagnose or treat disease. Please do not apply any of this information without first discussing it with your doctor. Here is your host, Dr. Ruiz.
Hello, everyone. Just back from a brief hiatus, I guess, last week with our first interview of the year, and now with a Q&A episode. It's kind of exciting because this is episode 50. And here with me is the one and only Adam Sadowski. Adam, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Dr. Ruiz. How are you?
Fantastic. Just having fun, kind of boring games, boring NFL games, and just ready to record a podcast.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think before New Year's was the last time we did it, so this might be the first of the year.
Yeah, this is the first Q&A episode of the year. And what I've found out is that people are really liking this Q&A format. Other than Mike T. Nelson's interview, my Q&A podcast for December were the most downloaded of the podcast. So, maybe there's something about this and maybe people are interested. And we have a couple of questions that we want to answer. And we have a special report on sleep. So, Adam, how's clinic life?
Clinics, it's awesome. You see the ins and outs of the medical system and, seeing what all the docs and the residents go through and just all the excellent work and the teamwork that we provide at school, and just kind of, it's a humbling experience. You learn so much. You go from the didactic classroom learning and not really seeing patients to all of a sudden seeing, everything you learn being put to work.
If someone is in the Portland area and they're looking for a naturopath, where can they seek this care, or where can they find someone that can help them get into this functional aspect of medicine and help them solve their problems?
Yeah, so aside from Googling naturopathic doctors in Portland or integrative medicine in Portland, definitely Google our NUNM teaching clinic. We have multiple clinics throughout the Portland area. So if you just Google NUNM clinic, you can find out a ton of information over there.
That's awesome. Over here in Arizona, if you want to become my patient, you can call Integrative Health. Our phone number is 480-657-0003. And you can schedule a free 15 consultation with me, and we can sit down or over the phone and discuss your health. And if you want to help people in the Arizona area, if you want to help students learn, SENM also has a student clinic. And just Google SENM and you can make your appointment and help us by learning. I'm so thankful of all the patients that I saw while I was studying. So, Adam, you want to go ahead and roll question one?
Yeah, sure. So this question comes from someone who sent Guillermo a question over Facebook, which is a great way to get in contact with him as well. And this person was asking, they want to buy some MelissaOfficinalis essential oil while I'm visiting my parents in the United States in February. I bought some in the United Kingdom, but it was dead cheap, so I'm not sure if it was very good, as I see other good brands go for around 75 pounds for a 5 milliliter bottle. Could you advise a good brand and reasonable price for MelissaOfficinalis oil? I want to try it internally and externally for acute cold sore episodes.
That's a great question. I was really excited when I got that question. I actually answered it on Facebook, but I figured that more people might be interested in this answer. It's super cool because I actually work at a virology lab specifically looking at HSV, or herpes simplex virus. And I've done a bunch of experiments, and there's a couple of publications on the actual mechanism for MelissaOfficinalis against the cold sores. It's funny that, that I kind of made my name around the paleo community talking about botanicals, and I don't think I've personally talked about botanicals on my podcast. So first and foremost, the plant MelissaOfficinalis, or lemon balm, is in the text as being a very traditional use plant for cold sores. Working at a virology lab, we wanted to see if this traditional knowledge was actually was real. So we decided to create an in vitro experiment to prove or disprove if MelissaOfficinalis was indeed good against HSV cold sores. So what we did actually, we first got, I think it was like 80 different extracts of different plants that have some history against HSV. And we tried these plants using a hydroethanolic extraction to see if they would work against the HSV virus.
So for anyone who doesn't know what the hydroethanol solvent is, do you want to explain to the listeners what that is?
Yeah. Hydroethanolic extraction. It's basically taking the dry plant material of whatever plant and then making a concoction or just submerging that plant material in a mixture of ethanol and water. And on the text, classically, whenever you look at botanical medicine text, they give you certain parameters on how to extract the medicine part of the plant. And it can vary wildly. Some people might prefer a high ethanolic extraction with like 100 proof ethanol. Other people might prefer a more water-based product. Some people put glycerin into the mix. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of consensus as to what the best extraction method is. So what we did a 50-50, 50% water, 50% ethanol extraction. And we tested all of these different plants. Completely blinded so as to not be kind of biased into which plant was going to work. And it turned out that one of the most effective plants against the HSV virus happened to be MelissaOfficinalis, lemon balm. So once we had this data and proving that indeed MelissaOfficinalis can block the replication of HSV in vitro, we decided to go one step further. And what we did is we extracted MelissaOfficinalis using different vehicles from super non-polar hexane. And hexane is not one that's used in classical traditional botanical medicine, but we just wanted to see what made this plant tick in regards to its ability to block the replication of HSV. So from hexane, toluene, methanol, ethanol, all the way to water, which is super polar. And it turns out that the best extraction method for this in vitro type of experiment was a water extraction. So from that, we know that this one constituent within the plant that blocks HSV is very polar. If you know anything about like a little bit of biochemistry or chemistry, essential oils are not going to be very polar. They're going to be like completely the opposite. They don't suspend in water. So in our experiment, the most effective way to destroying HSV was using a water extraction of MelissaOfficinalis or lemon balm. If you want to try to stop the replication of the herpes simplex virus, the best and easiest way of doing it would be to just make a tea, a Melissa tea. And that's kind of cool because MelissaOfficinalis lemon balm is really inexpensive. So you don't have to go buy, an ounce or a couple of ounces of the MelissaOfficinalis essential oil. Now, that essential oil might be useful for other things. I haven't personally used it against HSV. What we find a lot of times is that when you concentrate all that biomass and you make a very strong essential oil extract, they tend to be a little bit more toxic towards cells, where the Melissa tea was not only effective, but it was also safe with the monolayer within the in vitro experiment. Curiously, all of the plants that had similar activity, except one, against HSV, were within the same family of plants, the Lamiaceae family. So all of the Lamiaceae, and a couple of examples of Lamiaceae are mint, lavender, spearmint, stevia. All of these plants that are related actually had a certain level of activity against HSV. They all work best in our experiments using a water extraction. It's super cool because, they're all related. So evolutionarily related plants have evolutionarily related mechanisms of defense against pathogens, and this mechanism of defense happens to be water soluble. So maybe, that when the traditional botanical texts, some of them call for a hydroethanolic extraction at different rates. In our experiment, the most effective way of using that plant was doing a tea. And that puts us one step closer, because now we know how the molecule behaves when we extract it from the plant. That puts us one step closer to figuring out what is the molecule within the thousands of phytochemicals within the plant that is responsible for attacking HSV.
Now, I have a quick question, and that is, why did you guys initially start off with a 50 to 50 extraction?
Okay, so that's a cool question, and it's high throughput. So we had, no lie, right now we have probably a collection of 160 to 200 medicinal plants. And whenever someone comes up with a project, on how to test, we are going to do a 50% extraction, because that takes care of some of the water-soluble phytochemicals within the plant, and then the ethanol takes care of other phytochemicals that might not come out in water into solution.
So you're trying to get best of both worlds.
Yeah, we're trying to get best of both worlds. So the first pass is a 50-50 extraction, and then we try them all out. And if we see a couple of plants that are candidates for the next step, then we adjust the different ratios and we do a more sophisticated extraction to see what phytochemicals are coming out at different ranges of hydrostatic pulling. Yeah, so it's the first pass is just a high throughput, just to see what works best. And then after that, then we kind of prune down from 200 to maybe 5 or 6 candidates. And then from those 5 or 6 candidates, then we move on to the next step in research. Now, that doesn't mean, we have a couple of plants that they work really well again in our in vitro experiments when they're dry. And if you use the fresh plant, you have no activity. So that doesn't mean that the fresh plant has no use. It tells us that for our purposes, that fresh plant doesn't work and you should use the dried plant. So it's just high throughput, just trying to make our lives simpler. But I wouldn't discard, the other, 195 plants as having no value.
And then also, do you want to explain to our listeners the difference between an in vitro and an in vivo experiment?
Yes. So an in vitro experiment is something that you do in a petri dish. So, our experiments, we do a lot of experiments that are proof of concept / trying to put some in vitro data behind our profession. It's funny, sure, we love the meta-analysis that, that's the highest form of proof that you can have, for a medical procedure or a medical intervention, to see if it works better than placebo. Funny enough, there's not a lot of in vitro data for our type of medicine, for naturopathic medicine. And at times, I've encountered scientists that always argue that, so if you don't have the meta-analysis, then they'll say, oh, it's just in vitro data. But if you don't have the in vitro data, they won't even look at any of the other research because you don't have a mechanism. So it's kind of funny how things work. You have your biases, and according to your bias, that's how you start looking at data. And it happens a lot, in the case of HSV for cold sores, you can make the argument that a topical application can have some replicability when it comes to, having a topical cold sore and then using that experiment data and applying it topically, because you were putting that medicine directly on the cell layer. But we don't have any data on like consuming Melissa or drinking the tea, and we don't know the pharmacokinetics of the substance to go systematic and go through your kidneys or your liver, and then how it's going to act upon your cold sore. Traditionally, Melissa officinalis is also used for hyperthyroidism. So we really don't know if by fighting, this cold sore, if you're also making your thyroid a little bit sluggish. So it's difficult for me to recommend anything because the data is not there. Maybe topically, it's not going to affect the thyroid, but if you ingest a bunch of Melissa, maybe it will, slow down your thyroid. Who knows? But yeah, it's a weird, scientific world that we live in, because all this research has to start somewhere, and there's not a lot of funds to pay for this research, and you have to go step by step. I'm a big fan of botanical medicine, and someone has to do this stuff, and it's exciting stuff. And, maybe once everything settles, none of the in vitro experiments will transfer to humans. But the data right now that we have on the usability of different plants against DNA viruses is very, very encouraging. A lot of the studies that we have done with Melissa officinalis is comparing the in vitro studies that got things like the ethanol or Abreva, if you're not familiar, that got them approved by the FDA. So everything starts from a concept, from an idea, from a hypothesis, and then it grows and you start doing in vitro experiments. So we have replicated a bunch of these studies using Melissa versus, using this, the ethanol. And one of the coolest things was this. So we grabbed a bunch of virus, a HSV virus, okay? And then we infected cells with the HSV.
What kind of cells did you guys infect?
We use Vera cells, which are, it's a type of very robust cell. Some cell lines are really hard to grow, and Vera cells are, super easy to grow, and they're very resilient, and they plaque really well. So, because when we do plaque analysis, that's how we count how many colonies of cells were killed.
So where do these Vera cells derive from?
So Vera cells are cells from a lineage associated with kidney epithelial cells extracted from African green monkeys.
Cool.
Yeah, and I also worked, like probably the most famous cell line is HeLa cells. I've also had the fortune of working with HeLa cells, and that's a whole hour podcast about HeLa cells. So we infected Vera cells with the HSV virus, and we did a pre-treatment with Melissa 15 minutes before the infection. So, just imagine a bucket, okay? And then you have cells. And then we put Melissa, and then we added the virus. So 15 minutes before we added the virus, and then 5 minutes after we added the virus. So that same bucket with cells, add the virus, and then add Melissa. And then at 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours, and 48 hours. And it turns out that the virus gets deactivated before it enters the cell. So by doing some investigation, the way Melissa officinalis works is by blocking the heparin receptor within the HSV virus that allows the virus to attach to the cell membrane and then go inside the cell, which is the same way that Abreva works. That's why it's so important that when you have a cold sore, you have to put the Abreva like right away, because what's happening is that once you have the cold sore, you do have some active virus already attacked inside the cell. But then that little cold sore bursts and it releases more virus. So by putting the Abreva on your cold sore, it blocks that glycoprotein and prevents the other viruses from entering other cells. It's a very similar mechanism that Melissa officinalis is showing in our in vitro experiments.
Now, did the other herbs you guys were assessing, did they also have a similar mechanism of action, or did they inhibit the virus through a different mechanism of action, but to a lesser degree?
So within the Lamiaceae family, through evolutionary medicine and through experiments, we have deducted that it's the same compound, that all of these plants are expressing the same compound. Now, there are other plants that we tested that work even after the virus has been infected. So they work, at 5 minutes, at 10 minutes, and 2 hours post-infection. So we assume, just by these early results, that those other plants have different mechanisms of action. And this is where botanical medicine becomes like kind of interesting and kind of like exciting, because now classically it's rare that you treat a person with a single botanical. Most classical botanical medicine practitioners always use synergistic blends. So you can start imagining that by combining different mechanisms of action, you're going to have a better response against viruses and bacteria.
I think something that, Guillermo, you should explain to our listeners as well is the difference between an essential oil versus an extracted tincture versus a tea.
Okay, you're extracting different things in each one of these forms of administering these botanicals. Like, for example, in a tea, you're going to be extracting more of the polar type of phytochemicals that are within that plant. And then hydroethanolic, then now you're in a mixed polarity, so you're going to be, in theory, extracting a more diverse number of phytochemicals. And then with an essential oil, now you're very specific and you are concentrating a ton of biomass into this very tiny amount of oil. In our research, we find that this concentration of very specific phytochemicals, they tend to be kind of harmful. We don't have a lot of good results because we don't know what's happening. We don't know if the essential oil is killing the in vitro monolayer, and that's why we have a reduction of virus, or if it's killing the virus and the monolayer, or if it's just killing the virus. So we don't know. So, at least when it comes to MelissaOfficinalis and HSV viruses, on an in vitro experiment, the essential oils are kind of caustic. Now, have you ever had absinthe?
I have.
Okay, and have you ever participated in the absinthe ritual?
Go on.
Okay, so in classical French cuisine, or mixology, when you drink absinthe, you bring a special spoon and a piece of sugar, okay, and then you have the absinthe sitting at the bottom, and then you decant water over the sugar. When the water touches the absinthe, it makes it milky and white. And you can probably Google this absinthe ritual, and that's how you're supposed to consume absinthe. Well, absinthe is a hydroethanolic extraction. It's this high ethanolic mixture of different plants, such as the most famous one being wormwood. And different people have different recipes, and when you prepare it, it's nice and clear and has a greenish tint to it. When you put the water, what's happening is you're changing the hydrostatics of that mixture so fast that some of those constituents jump out of solution and precipitate. Okay? Interestingly enough, if you have constituents that are precipitated, imagine if you can see it with your naked eye, they are too big to go inside the cell or inside the bacteria or attack the virus. So if you precipitate a tincture, that tincture might be rendered useless, which is really funny because sometimes you take a tincture, and if they're like super concentrated, or like I can think of echinacea being one of them, or laurea, and you put it in water, it becomes milky, and you might be taking the actual thing that's working against whatever you want to use it for out of solution, and it's going to be useless.
That's really cool.
Yeah, how funny is that? But again, the things that are coming out of solution have not been quantified. They have not been studied, so we don't even know what is making these plants tick. So there is so much work to be done in botanical medicine, and we're just scratching the surface. Hopefully, when you precipitate, like laurea or echinacea, maybe the constituents that are coming out of solution are not the actives, but they could be. So we should be looking into how to extract the tincture. What is the thing that is making this tincture work? And then what is the best extraction method to maintain those substances suspended in the vehicle? And then if we precipitate this extraction, is the tincture still active?
And this is one of the difficult things, is because it's hard to compare different brands of herbal tinctures, because what were the growing conditions of the herb? Were they grown inside? Were they grown outside? Were they stressed out so they might have some more phytochemical constituents that the plant would naturally produce? Or were they applied with pesticides or herbicides, which may downregulate the protective mechanisms that the plant's going to produce, because they now have this exogenous protective barrier from the herbicide or the pesticide? Were they wildly harvested? And then, as you were saying, with the different extractions, was it a 50-50 extraction? Are they in an oil? Are they in alcohol? What's the percentage of the alcohol that they used? So these are all different things that we have to take into account, which does make this science very difficult.
Frustrating and beautiful at the same time. To your point, you can take the same plant, okay, and then let's say Melissa, okay, you take all the leaves, you dry them, and then you divide that Melissa and send it to 2 different herbalists, and you ask them, can you make a Melissa medicine out of this plant material? Same plant material. Their knowledge might tell them that, oh, you need to make, I'm going to use a 70% ethanol, 30% water extraction. And then the other herbalist is going to say, well, I'm going to make a tea. There is no standardization, because what you learn is what you know. If you go to an emergency department and you ask, why do you prescribe amoxicillin and not bicillin, or bicillin and not amoxicillin? Depending on which attending physician taught you, you're going to have a preference. So same thing with botanical medicine. Depending on who you apprenticed under, depending on what school you went to, that's going to be the type of extraction that you're going to make for that plant. So it kind of drives me a little bit bonkers when you can go to, like, for example, Whole Foods and buy tinctures, and then you have Melissa tinctures and you have oregano tinctures, and you have, from 3 different companies, and then the 3 different companies have different extraction methods for the same plant. That's not to say that these tinctures don't work. That's not to say that these companies are doing a bad thing. That, to me, we should kind of like strive to figure out what is the best extraction method for each one of these plants for each purpose. And what do I mean by that? Okay, so let's think about like something like berberines, okay? So berberines found in curcuma longa or curcumin. There's a couple of berberines in turmeric, and they can be used for many things. Berberines can fight bacteria. Berberines can decrease inflammation. Berberines can lower lipids. Okay, what is the best extraction method for each one of these conditions? It could be that biting into a turmeric root is the best way to do all 3. Or it could be that maybe for lipids, maybe you have to do a high ethanol extraction. And for antimicrobial, maybe you do a 50-50 hydroethanolic. And then for inflammation, maybe the raw plant material, freeze-dried, is the best way of using it. Unfortunately, we don't know. We don't know which one is the best for what. So ordering a berberine on Amazon might be kind of confusing. Or, maybe you have this brand of berberine that you've been using for the past 10 years to lower your lipids. And then maybe that company goes out of business, or their price increase tenfold, and then you decide to go with another company. If their extraction method is not the same, it might not work in the way that you expected it to work. What I'm trying to say is this: botanicals have been used for so long, and yet our understanding of botanical medicine is in its infancy. So we should be a little bit more sophisticated, and we should be asking and donating and encouraging this type of research.
also, try and do a little bit of investigation into the actual company that's with the product that they're selling, because supplements have a pretty bad rap in not containing anything that they actually say is on the ingredients list. You have to do your due diligence with certain companies. Do they lay out all the information for you, or does it seem like it's a very hard information to get from the company, or are they kind of more inviting and kind of telling you exactly what they're doing?
Which brings to another point. One of the big mechanisms of action, or one of the big ways that mushrooms work, is because they have something called beta glucans. And beta glucans, it's basically a fancy way of saying a sugar molecule with a beta bond. Now, Adam, what is the most famous beta bond that humans can break?
I see that you're trying to prepare me for my board exams, and I'm going to have to go with lactose.
Lactose, exactly. So humans are unable to break most of beta bonds. The disaccharide weren't able to break it, but we are able to break lactose. Lactose is a glucose and a galactose molecule bonded by a beta bond. Like amylose or maltose, all of those are alpha bonds. And those we're able to break, with amylase really easily. Beta bonds, though, unless you have a glucose and a galactose join in a beta bond and you're able to produce lactase, you won't be able to break most beta bonds. And mushrooms provide a lot of beta glucans, long chains of glucose molecules joined by a beta bond. So imagine, this is just a fancy way of saying a chain of sugars connected by beta bonds. And what these beta glucans do, they go into your intestine and they actually are kind of like irritating, and your body recognizes them as intruders, but they are very gentle, and your body actually induces an immune response to try to get rid of these beta glucans, and thus your immune system gets activated, and that's a way that mushrooms activate the immune system. Okay, so I was at a conference, the Society of Integrative Oncology, SIO. Where was it? Miami it was last year, and Paul Stamets, his product line was there. And take it with a grain of salt, but I was talking to this dude from Host Defense, and he was telling me that most products out in the market that are standardized to a certain amount of beta glucans, it's just basically printed sugars that are artificial, that are not coming from mushrooms. So you're basically just eating sugar pills, like literally.
Wow.
Yeah, and now, are these artificially made, not coming from mushrooms, beta glucans acting in the same way as the beta glucans found in mushrooms? I don't know. But if you're paying for turkey tail and if you're paying for reishi, wouldn't you want that to come from an actual mushroom?
Right.
There's a bunch of amazing companies out there. A couple of my favorite companies, Gaia Herbs, Biotics, Designs for Health, so many more. Those are the ones that are coming to my mind right now. Orthomolecular, Thorne. I like those companies, and I've used them, and I've gotten really good results. They're not sponsoring me. I've visited Gaia Herbs, and the amount of technology and amazing knowledge that is held in North Carolina, about botanical medicine is out of this world.
Yeah, I think Gaia actually, they kind of encourage people to come to their facilities and let people see, what is going on in making their product.
I had the fortune of visiting Gaia Herbs, and dude, I was blown away.
Just to quickly summarize on that one, there's a difference between an essential oil and a tincture, and there's different ways to create a tincture. You could do a tincture with oil, water, alcohol.
Or eating the plant directly.
Or eating the plant, right. And then you could use a dry or fresh herb. So, there's differences with these choices. You got to, kind of know what you're looking for.
And one more thing before, and just think about it, okay? If it wasn't this complicated, if these plants were just completely, like, for example, antimicrobial, then how would you explain these plants also being used as culinary spices? So if you think about it, like a dried oregano that you're sprinkling over your pizza, it's probably not going to be that antibacterial or antimicrobial. But if you actually get the oregano, you dry it, you concentrate it, you extract it with a hydroethanolic, maybe that releases the beast within the oregano in order to make it antimicrobial. So it makes perfect sense that maybe in some cases you can just eat the plant, but it makes sense that evolutionarily speaking, in order for these plants to be medicinally activated, there has to be some sort of processing of the plant.
So another listener sent you a message, and she says, my boss is getting this stomach sleeve thing. He has had to see the psychiatrist and nutritionist. I don't think he has lost 1 pound from whatever changes he has made, but there is so much more he should try. I gave up on trying to talk about things. What are some things he should know about this procedure before doing it?
That's an interesting question because it touches in so many aspects of like the mess that we've gotten into. I used to tell this story and I haven't told it in a while. If you read like Roman novels, or have you ever heard of like the vomitoriums?
No.
Okay, so vomitoriums were completely false. They never existed. But it was this idea that during these huge parties, people would just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and then they would go to the vomitorium and then make themselves puke in order so they could come back and eat some more. So it's about hedonism and things like that. So imagine in like 10 years from now when the Martians come in and we have destroyed planet Earth, okay? And they're telling the little alien children, back in the United States of America, they used to eat and eat and eat and eat until they couldn't eat no more. And then they would inject insulin into their stomachs so they wouldn't die from hyperglycemia. And that's actually true. That's what we're doing. So it's kind of crazy that we have gotten to the point where we just throw our hands up and then we decide to go make our stomach smaller surgically in order for the amount of volume needed to be satiated is lower. Thus, you reduce calories, thus, you will lose weight. Now, couple of things about gastric bypass. It actually works. It's very successful. I was sharing with Adam before we started recording that there's some papers where they test people's insulin resistance before the gastric bypass, and then after the gastric bypass, insulin resistance completely reverses. This is like within days of having the gastric bypass. So something happens, and I'm going to quote the paper here. It says, as a conclusion, this finding has implications for our understanding of the mechanism of insulin resistance in several obese patients and is consistent with a humoral mechanism emanating from the GI tract. So physiologically, there is a change that happens when you have that reduction in the stomach size. And if you've tried a bunch of things and maybe you are predisposed to heart attacks and predisposed to obesity or predisposed to leptin resistance or insulin resistance, and you've gone too far and now you need to make like a drastic decision, I really wouldn't be that opposed to having someone have a lap band or a gastric bypass. Yeah, like a Roux-en-Y. But with the understanding, and I'm so glad that, when this person asked me this question, they did mention that they were seeing a psychiatrist and they were seeing a nutritionist. What is the underlying problem that is preventing this person from losing weight?
So what do you suggest for people who kind of have the cards stacked against them? Say this person is in more of a quote-unquote obesogenic environment where they live in a food desert, or they have socioeconomic difficulties where it's easier for them to buy cola and the chips as opposed to buying the fresh produce, or the people who don't really know much about nutrition or have kind of a heavier family where everybody around them is more prone to overeating and don't really exercise. So that's kind of what they see. And, you have the whole nature versus nurture argument pop up.
There was a quote in the book, The Audacity of Hope, about poverty within minority groups. What they were trying to relay is that it's not like people want to be poor. It's not like people want to be obese. It's not like people want to be unhealthy. It's more about you don't know any other way. And that's where reading different books and listening to podcasts and trying to do the best for yourself, it's the only solution. Now, how do we make this system of alternative or complementary medicine work for everyone? And that's where we need to be able to scale this movement and try to reach as many people as possible. So for obesity, it's very sexy to think of obesity as it's only calories in, calories out, or let's just not eat meat and that's going to solve all your health problems, or let's eat an ancestral diet and that's going to solve all your problems, or, what's the joke, Adam? Have you gone gluten-free, and that's going to solve all of your problems? No, it's so much more complicated than that. And that's where we need to be, helping each other as a tribe and reaching out to our friends or to your boss who is having this obesity problem that didn't happen overnight, and try to educate them. But at some point, and this is where it gets difficult, where do you draw the line? And it's like yelling at clouds. And then, you just have to take care of yourself and be an example, and other people maybe following your advice, after that.
Yeah, and I think another great resource that this person can look into is the work done by Dr. Spencer Nadolsky. And he is a DO who does a lot of work in the obesity field. And he did a great job. I believe it was on his website where he kind of explained this whole sort of environmental type of aspect to this situation, where if you have in one corner, you have the kid who was encouraged to be into sports, whose parents lived a healthy lifestyle, who might be a little bit better off socioeconomically, and they're encouraging their kids to get active and play in sports, and they have the means of getting better food choices. And then in the other corner, you might have someone whose parents are, more overweight, or just not really into the whole active lifestyle thing, or have access to as many variety of fresh fruits and vegetables as the prior example. So this is kind of like what we were saying before, with the cards stacked up against you.
And it gets even bigger than that. Because, like, for example, what about people with hypothyroidism that is undiagnosed? And then these people that have hypothyroidism, now they are physiologically unable to have a good basal metabolic rate. So this problem with obesity is so much more complex than calories in, calories out, or being gluten-free, or, it has so many different caveats. And that's where the only way we're going to be able to beat this problem is probably going to be with education. Outside of that, I don't see any other way. And then, because you can say, maybe science can beat this problem, but whose science are you going to follow, and what are your biases, and how are you going to use those biases to satisfy your discoveries? So I think that in the end, it's just going to be, educating and being compassionate and basically being your own example. The toughest people to convince are your friends and your family.
Just this weekend on Saturday, OHSU, which is the main medical school here in Portland, Oregon Health Sciences University, held an integrative medicine day where they kind of had a panel of docs for different topics come and just talk. And in the second panel, where they were talking about pre-metabolic syndrome, one of the docs gave a really interesting point. He was saying, you can tell your patient, do A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, And you could have this great plan, but it could be so overwhelming for the patient. And then something that I thought was really interesting was, you could tell the patient all these things, but is the doctor doing those things? Is the doctor also being an example? Is the doctor working out? Is the doctor sleeping 8 hours a night? Is the doctor, eating a healthy diet? Is the doctor not stressed out? Does the doctor have a good support group? So I think that was a really interesting point that came up.
To bring it back to the original question, I think that, okay, so maybe you have someone that has gone too many years and their weight, whether it's their fault or not, whether, their circumstances led them to be a certain weight, whether they had a physiological problem, changing the underlying cause, whether you do it before or after this procedure. Two excellent resources for changing habits and making you reduce your calorie intake almost without you even noticing would be Wired to Eat, the book by Rob Wolf, or Hungry Brain, the book by Stefan Guyenet, because those books teach you how to basically snap out of whatever preconceived notions or reward systems that you have created that have led many, many people to overeating. This is not to say that these surgeries are completely benign. There are some you can develop a couple of bad things after having these surgeries.
So what are some of the things that could potentially occur with something such as a lap band or Roux-en-Y gastric bypass?
You could reverse it, so like if you eat too much, you can pop the band, or you can make it move and make your stomach smaller or bigger, and then you can literally eat through it. You can have malabsorption issues. So remember, that your stomach is a certain size for a certain reason, and that basically helps you crush and make chyme, which is the one of the early steps of digestion. And within that hydrochloric acid environment of your stomach, you begin to break down proteins and carbohydrates and fats. So you might have malabsorption issues where you become anemic. You can have bleeds. Most of your vitamin B12 that we consume is absorbed in the stomach, and having decreased acid content can cause pernicious anemia. So there's a bunch of things that could happen, and that's the difference between changing the environment for a procedure like this in a good way or a bad way. So, for example, you can have a patient that has decided to do this lap band, and as a practitioner, you can say, okay, let's do this, but we're going to do it right. Let's change your habits. Let's change the ritual of eating and use different strategies to help you control yourself and be satisfied with a normal amount of food intake. You can talk about maybe underlying emotional causes for binging or overeating. You can create a plan where you are supplementing vitamins and minerals in a good, responsible way to prevent nutritional deficiencies. And this gets into a completely different aspect of things, because now imagine if you can't absorb, let's say, proteins, do you think that taking a pill is going to be able to dissolve the gelatin coat, and then you're going to be able to absorb maybe the vitamin C or the vitamin B12? So maybe you start getting a little bit more creative with doing nutritional smoothies, or maybe parenteral nutrition in the form of like IVs to make sure that your levels of vitamin B12 and B6 and thiamine and magnesium and calcium and all of these different things that you need in order to function properly are being met. So obviously it's not to castigate or to shame anyone that is thinking about doing this, but let's try to do it in the safest, healthiest way that we can do it in order to have the best and healthiest results.
Awesome.
So yeah, tons of habits, man. And in the end, I think that's going to be the key. Being able to form habits that are going to be sustainable and supportive of any intervention. And it's actually a great segue to the final part of the podcast, because there's a lot of talk about the importance of sleep. Adam found this really cool paper on non-pharmacological ways of improving sleep, and I'm going to let him just share the contents of the paper. He is not a doctor yet, so he's unable to give you any medical advice.
So this was actually a pretty interesting article, and the title of it is a non-pharmacologic approach to managing insomnia in primary care, published in the American Academy of Physician Assistants. In this paper, it wasn't a randomized controlled trial or anything of that sort. It was more of kind of like a review of sort of things that might help people who have insomnia. But I think what this article was really interesting was that they were definitely discussing more of the lifestyle-based approaches that you can take to help improve your sleep. And what these authors talked about was they proposed sort of 3 categories for insomnia. There's the predisposing factors, there are precipitating factors, and there are perpetuating factors. And within the predisposing factors, these are sort of things that might predispose you to insomnia. So what they brought up were the 2 main things were physiologic and psychological. And they both sort of intertwined in that it was more of kind of like a heightened stress. So sort of like your sympathetic nervous system is turned up to the nth degree. And that now that you're stressed, it might be harder for you to fall asleep because you're not in a well-rested state. You're thinking about work, you're thinking about life, you're thinking about all these things that are stressing you out. And because you're stressed out, you might not go to sleep. Precipitating factors. So were also kind of psychological. So maybe you're anxious about your exam tomorrow. I have a hematology exam tomorrow, so maybe I'm not going to sleep well tonight because I'm anxious about that. Maybe your occupation. So maybe you're a night shift worker, so your whole sleep schedule's turned off, or maybe you're working in the ER and you're working 12+ hour shifts. And then maybe there's some sort of environment exposure. So maybe there's construction work going outside, or you live next to a train station, so you keep waking up at night because of that. And then with perpetuating factors, what the authors explained about this was kind of that whole, going back to the stress and anxiety, is you're perpetuating this anxiety of not being able to sleep. So, you're saying, okay, I'm going to go to bed at 9 o'clock tonight. And the whole day you just think about sleep, and that, you're going to have everything set up perfectly. And then all this stress and anxiety about sleep causes you to actually not be able to sleep. So you're kind of like overthinking things. Another perpetuating factor that they brought up was napping later in the day for too long. And then something that I thought was interesting, because I personally have definitely experienced this, was lying in bed while you can't sleep. So what these authors suggest was, if you're not sleeping, if you can't fall asleep within 15 to 20 minutes, it might not be a good idea to just lay there. It might be better to, get up and go to another room. And definitely don't go to another room and just start playing video games or watching TV, but go to another room and maybe do something that you find relaxing until you become sleepy again, and then go back to your bedroom and go to sleep. Some of the things that they proposed to do outside of pharmacologic therapy were stimulus control, cognitive therapy, sleep hygiene, relaxation training, and exercise. And with regards to stimulus control, I kind of, in my own mind, kind of put stimulus control and sleep hygiene together, but these authors separated them out. And with stimulus control, the authors are kind of saying that they think it would be a good idea if people positively associated their bedroom with sleep, and only for sleep and for intercourse. Not to have sleep as a place where you can watch TV and do your bills, or do that paper that's due the next day, or any sort of stressful environment. They want, the authors are suggesting that it's better if you have that, create a stimulus of a relaxing environment for that bedroom.
That is really cool, because I have been telling my patients for a while now, ever since I was a student, that the bedroom is only for 2 things, dude: sleep and sex. It's completely convergent. I probably read it somewhere, or I heard someone say it, and it made total sense in my head that we're creatures of habit. if your habit is you go to your room and you sit down and you start thinking about how stressful your day has been or traffic tomorrow, every time you go to that same place, you're going to feel the same way. There was a great paper talking about overdosing on heroin and how the environment that you use to get the dose of heroin affects the amount of tolerance towards heroin. So like if you are used to using a certain amount in a closet and you develop a little bit of tolerance, 2 weeks from now you're at a party and then you go into a bathroom and you try to use the same amount that you had in that closet, you OD. And that's completely a physiological effect from habit. And it makes total sense that, if you want your sanctuary for sleep to be, in order for you to make yourself fall asleep faster or to have restful sleep, it makes sense not to have any TVs, not to have any LED lights, keep it cold, and use it for two things, sleep and sex. And if you create that habit, then, you're going to walk into that room and immediately you're going to probably feel sleepy.
And then these authors also suggested to only go to bed when you're sleepy as opposed to actually forcing yourself to sleep. And they also suggested to try to get in and out of bed at the same time.
Michael Bruce talks about this phenomenon. Dr. Michael Bruce says that the most important habit that you can have regarding sleep hygiene is waking up at the same time every day, even on the weekends. And the reasoning behind this is that your body is going to set a set point, and of course it's going to set the best set point for you in the most advantageous way. So like, for example, if Monday through Friday you wake up at 6:30 to get ready to go to work, and then on Saturday and Sunday you decide I'm going to sleep until 9, that set point is going to be reset pretty fast because your body craves that sleep. So the best way of avoiding that Monday morning, feeling of grogginess and not wanting to go to work is for you to wake up at the same time on Saturday and Sunday.
Another thing that I thought was pretty interesting that these authors talked about was to actually not nap. They didn't mention whether it's, anything beyond that. They just said no napping. I think it would be cool to see a different paper report on kind of like a siesta, like a midday nap for 15 minutes, or napping earlier in the day as opposed to say like an hour or two nap an hour before bed or something, because maybe for some people they need that nap to get them through school or to get them to their job or just to kind of quiet down.
I imagine that the napping is going to, and this is just me talking out my ass, I imagine that the napping is going to be like a necessity if you like sleep. Dr. Schmidt, our physiology teacher, was telling us that if you go many days without REM sleep, okay, and REM sleep is necessary for life, and you shorten the amount of REM sleep that you have with different distractors, during sleep studies, you will be able to go into REM sleep faster. So you won't have that delay time if you are craving that REM sleep. So I imagine that in a perfect environment, in a perfect lifestyle, you probably won't need to nap, and it's not necessary for good health. But I imagine that if you're super sleep deprived and you're so sleep deprived that you're falling asleep everywhere, probably napping is not going to be a problem. And it makes sense that if you have insomnia, napping would create a problem.
Also, what these authors talked about was trying to treat some underlying conditions. And what they brought up, the four main ones that they brought up was obstructive sleep apnea, nocturia, which is waking up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and to specifically urinate, GERD, gastroesophageal reflux, and then chronic pain. And these things all make sense because with obstructive sleep apnea, maybe you're waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air, and that's waking you up. With nocturia, you're getting up and using the bathroom. So maybe when you go to the bathroom, you turn on that light, and all of a sudden you have all that bright light, and maybe now you have difficulty falling back asleep. With GERD, maybe you wake up with like a burning sensation in your chest. So that's waking you up and disrupting your sleep. And then chronic pain, maybe you can't even fall asleep. So I think those are interesting points that the authors talked about. And then going back to what I was originally talking about, with what the authors suggested, what to do outside of pharmacological therapies, they also brought up cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And I don't really know much about cognitive behavioral therapy. I know that there are trainings that you have to do for it. And what these authors suggested was, if you're using cognitive behavioral therapy, to work with a trained therapist, and that the drawbacks to that is that it's not a common thing. I feel like if you were to ask somebody off of the street, you know what a cognitive behavioral therapist is, chances are they're going to say they don't know. It's not something that's super common and implemented in a lot of clinics. And they also suggested 6 to 10 sessions, but they also said that a drawback to this was that it can be fairly expensive. So that might not be an option for everybody. And then with sleep hygiene, they made a note in the article saying that sleep hygiene alone is not as effective as using stimulus control, relaxation, cognitive therapy, and hygiene altogether. And what they wrote in a table for the sleep hygiene interventions for insomnia was that they suggested maintaining a regular sleep-wake schedule. Don't make up for lost sleep on the weekends, which you talked about. Avoid napping. Keep the bedroom dark, quiet, and at a comfortable temperature. Don't check the time on your phone if you're awake at night. I feel like this could be for a number of things. Perhaps this could be because now you're looking at a bright light, or it could be because now you're sort of inducing that, maybe inducing that stress response where you're looking at the phone and you're upset that you woke up at 1 in the morning, and now you can't fall asleep. So now you're counting all the hours you lost and whatnot. An obvious one that perhaps people don't realize because maybe they're so fatigued that they're trying to make up for it during the day is avoiding stimulants. So coffee, dark chocolate, alcohol, nicotine, and they also said to avoid bright lights for 5 to 10 minutes before bedtime. So think, your television, phones, and computers. For me personally, I have to avoid bright lights probably at least 2 hours before bedtime. I do find, though, that for me personally, it's nice to turn on like Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever and watch and just kind of like dumb out for an hour just to sort of settle down after a long day at school or a busy day and whatnot. But there are apps that you could look into, such as f.lux. I know is for Mac, where your screen will essentially turn orange, and the whole sort of proposed mechanism to that is that it reduces the amount of blue light exposure from electronics. And the blue light, it's stimulating in the fact that it's shutting down or inhibiting the release of melatonin, which is one of the hormones that your body will secrete at nighttime to help you fall asleep. Some of the relaxation training that they suggested was mind-body stress reduction, so like meditation, yoga, deep breathing exercises. And then with exercise, they recommended doing vigorous exercise earlier in the morning seems to have a favorable sleep outcomes. And they also noted that you may need 16 weeks before noticing any sort of differences. So it's kind of, again, that it's more, the lifestyle aspect is, just because you worked out today doesn't necessarily mean you're going to fall asleep. Maybe it's something that you have to do on a repeated basis and establish these good sleep habits.
A couple of things that I want to touch on. First of all, with the peeing at night, clinically, I was taught that is like a really good sign for HPA axis dysfunction. The idea is that this, with stress hormone, you have excess cortisol circulating, which you're going to release aldosterone, which helps you retain water, which in the middle of the night, when you're dipping into your glucose stores and you have a little bit of cortisol resistance, then you're going to activate epinephrine. And that's when you wake up like in a panic, because you needed the epinephrine to release the extra glycogen that you need in order for your brain to function. And then with the blue light, versus warm lights, there was a paper just published, I think earlier this year. It was November 2017, actually, where they discover melanopsin receptors on fat cells. And that's fancy way of saying that your eyes are not the only thing that activates or deactivates the production of melatonin. And that's why it's so important to sleep in a completely dark room because the signal can be picked up by your fat cells. And this is kind of interesting because, like, for example, wearing a mask, okay, sure, your biggest source for, the stimulus is your eyes. So wearing a mask is going to block most of it. But if you have exposure in your skin, there are melanopsin receptors all over your body. So best case scenario, your room is completely blacked out and it's a place where you only sleep and have sex, and it's cold, and you can keep it the best way possible for a good sleeping environment. But if you go on a plane, of course, the plane is not going to be completely blacked out. So maybe wearing a mask on a plane makes sense because it's going to block the biggest receptor for blue light. That's a little cool trick that you can implement that is, sleep masks are pretty inexpensive, and that could help you sync to the new time zone faster. But it kind of doesn't translate to an environment that you completely control, like your bedroom. Let's try to make that bedroom the best sleeping sanctuary that you can in order for you to have the best sleep. And then finally, I just want to talk about the difference between sedating drugs or sleep drugs and sleep. Ethanol and other sedatives don't actually put you to sleep. They get you into a state of unconsciousness, and that's it. You can see yourself making the connection that you are sleeping, but you are actually in a state of unconsciousness. That does not bring you into REM sleep. That does not bring you into the building state or repair state that sleep brings you to. Depending on sleep medications is not a good strategy to substitute restorative sleep.
And I think it was just cool. I mean, nothing in this paper was really earth-shattering. They weren't comparing different interventions, and it wasn't, a rigorous paper. It was just pointing out these things that people probably aren't thinking about. They're saying, oh, why can't I sleep? Well, maybe there's these, behaviors that you haven't noticed or you've become accustomed to that, so now you don't notice them, that might be the underlying cause to why perhaps you can't sleep. And I think it was really cool that it was published in American Academy of Physician Assistants. So this is lifestyle and behavioral change making its way into the quote-unquote conventional medical system. And I think it's cool that doctors are, maybe suggesting sort of lifestyle intervention ahead of
prescribing Ambien.
Right. So, maybe they'll talk to them and say, hey, maybe put that, don't have your fourth espresso at 6 o'clock at night, or stop playing Candy Crush at 9:30 at night with the screen 2 inches from your face, or, let's take a deeper dive and see, do you have sleep apnea? Do you have these digestive issues at night? Are you getting up at night to urinate and, are you in pain? These things that maybe we don't always think about are coming to light, and I think it's cool that it's happening.
Again, being able to disseminate this information that is pretty inexpensive. How much is a roll of aluminum foil to cover your windows, and making sure that your TV is out of the bedroom, and being able to have restorative sleep and not rely on maybe buying the most fanciest bed or the most amazing blue blocking sunglasses. And to that, just like it's so important to have that blue light blocked at night, it is very important to have full spectrum light first thing in the morning in order for you to restart the circadian clock and to be able to stop the production of melatonin, because it drives me crazy when I see people in the morning wearing their blue blocking glasses, or maybe like at noon and they're looking at the computer and they have their blue blocking glasses. Because you see benefit from using yellow glasses, that doesn't mean that you should wear them all day long. Well, Adam, I think one of my listeners out of Florida was giving me shit for saying, oh, we've been here for 2 hours, and after we cut all the ums and ahs and all of that, the podcast ends up being shorter. And he was like, I'm being cheated of minutes. But the recorder says 2 hours and 1 minute, and we've covered a lot of ground, and I have a couple of amazing guests in the next couple of weeks. But as usual, if you have any questions, if you want to suggest something for the podcast, if you want to suggest a guest maybe, just shoot me an email, and then we'll make it happen.
Awesome, Guillermo. It was great talking to you. That was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun, dude. Talk to you soon.